Good morning, everyone. Thank you for patience. So very welcome, and thank you so much for joining us at the second year of RIGA IFF Goes VR. So this is our attempt to dissolute the border between cinema and virtual reality, because both of them are visual mediums and both of them need each other. That's at least how we feel about it.
We are totally happy to have our speakers today. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you will get and understand through our speakers and mentors why we are so excited about bringing film industry together with tech industry and telling stories in VR, because it is exciting, and I'm sure that the experts will inspire you to think this direction. So enjoy, and yes, and have a great day, and see you today in the networking party in the evening, and also tomorrow's hackathon, and on Sunday we close the event with pitching session about the projects which will be done in the hackathon and also here in the Splendid Palace. So you are very welcome to join in every point and meet us here.
So before we start with the inspirational lectures, I would also like to welcome the cultural attaché of the US Embassy, Rebecca Satterfield.
Hi everyone. Good morning, Labrit. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Rebecca Satterfield, and on behalf of the US Embassy, it's an honor to be here today in support of this festival. Our special thanks to the organizers of the Riga International Film Festival for organizing this awesome event and for our collaboration. We're really excited to see that this year the Riga International Film Festival chose to focus on VR. I think VR is such an important medium that has transformed the way we take in information, the way we learn, and it's also a hugely transformed cinematic experience. We are especially happy to welcome our guest speaker from the US, Sonja Bozic, to share her knowledge and experience with all of you. And actually, the embassy recently had the opportunity to assist Koris Avots, who is a Latvian living in Minnesota, to develop the first Latvian content VR film. It's called Perkons, a Rockumentary. And if you haven't seen this film yet, I highly recommend it. It's really awesome, especially through VR. So this film explains how the music of this Atmodas period rock group was an important catalyst that eventually led to Latvia's singing revolution and eventually its new independence. So the embassy has actually purchased 5 VR headsets, and we will make this movie available for viewing, both in Latvian and in English, in the audiovisual section of the Latvian National Library, starting this November. So I highly encourage you to see this film. Okay, and I hope today's lectures will be very useful and interesting to everyone attending, and as well as raise your interest in learning more about what VR has to offer. Thank you so much. Paldies.
So now I give the floor to Eva Brazdžionytė, who will be our moderator. And so, Eva.
So hello, good morning everyone. Very nice to see you all. And before I start, I want to know who are in the room, and that might also be helpful for the other speakers. So who consider yourself still students? Okay, a lot. Film professionals, culture professionals, film producers. Okay, very few. All right. And then hardcore gamers. Okay, gamers. Oh. Okay. Who had never played a Beat Saber? Okay, okay. Or if nobody knows who the Beat Saber is, so that also tells. All right, good. So yeah, my name is Eva Brazdžionytė. I'm coming from Lithuania, and don't read my bio in the booklet. I'm gonna tell you who I am because there I'm a undiscovered Latvian expert in animation, but truly. I have 10 years experience in culture management. I worked mostly with film festivals. Then 5 years back, I joined the Creative Europe Media Office as one of your sponsors. So was the LELDA in Lithuania, consulting various companies how to get European funding. And since then, it was 2014, I was traveling a lot to various events around Europe mostly, and starting to also follow what's happening with what's next in the film industry, so to say, and that was VR also. And so I followed that industry. I got bored with Creative Europe and just quit my job, freelanced. And almost a year ago, I joined a VR production company in Lithuania, Vilnius. We have our second film center financed production happening right now, which is 6DOF animation. And yeah. And I'm really thankful for Christina to invite me to and moderate the day, and also to give you a short lecture. And it's gonna be, after 1 year being in this industry, so what I learned, what I heard, and what I have to share with you. You might disagree with something I say, and then during coffee break we can get into discussion. Right now, augmented reality is very popular because of mobile users. We all have mobile phones. And I assume the future for AR is that it goes to the glasses. And there's a lot of developments happening there. But yeah, the usage of it is mostly in marketing, I would say, what I see right now. Where virtual reality, it's a full immersive experience, where you look around, you can experience, you can, get the total different feeling, and then the mixed reality where you can already interface with what you see. Why I'm so not successful? It's morning. There's another thing called Gartner Hype Cycle for Emerging Technologies. I'm wondering right now. I skipped one slide where I wanted to tell that VR is not the new thing, and I'm not gonna tell you more or all the history, how it developed, but let's say it started from 60s. You see here a few examples, and here also it's very similar to what we have right now actually, just more advanced. But it's not that new, and this slide also shows when AR and VR came to the market as emerging technologies. So you see that augmented reality started in 2006, and I didn't explain about the Gartner hype cycle, so it's divided into two axes, expectations and the time. So usually when technologies come on the market, they have huge expectations, and then there is a peak of it, and then it drops down. So both of those technologies travel this hype cycle, and then you notice that that's about it, and that was slope of enlightenment, and not even reached plateau of productivity, which means that everybody understands technology, use it, and it proves to be the right and good thing to do. And there is, I don't know, I think maybe other speakers can elaborate on their own opinions about that, but a short comment from my side, what I have researched is that one thing that in 2018, Gartner itself decided to draw an entirely new graph with no previous technologies involved. So that's one thing, and the industry reacted on it, like how come virtual reality disappeared from Gartner's hype cycle, was that, we are not a new emerging technology, we're already on the market. And everybody were very happy about this. I actually I'm not a fan of those charts, because there's a lot of different sources you can look upon, they all claiming how booming the XR market will be in upcoming 5 years, so on and so forth. But I still chose to show you this one because I think it's important to make a note here that where the money or the prognosis comes from, and that there are different colors here which separates hardware and software and e-commerce, which is again marketing. And so when you hear about this promising future of XR, understand that it's not only a software, but there is a hardware which drives the market. So there is sales happening, a lot of development in hard happening, and as well in software. And that in the end, their future is bright. The other graph, which is also a bit funny because these top industry use cases for business XR and consumer XR, and then the other line says percentage of XR product company stakeholders who believe that the following will be impacted by XR technology. So, but I chose also to show you to stress that the XR used in business or enterprise and also in consumer usage. And then those two, I'm not going to focus a lot on business here because we are in the festival and among creatives, but for business it's medical, manufacturing, military, industrial, tourism, retail, transportation, whereas consumer is mostly gaming. Those who were, who took the survey told so. Movies, television, medical, retail, tourism, e-commerce, transportation also. And another figure, which comes from VR Intelligence, it's a UK-based company who runs conferences around the globe, Europe, States mostly. And they did the research for 750 companies who are already working in XR. And that's the question asked about where those companies intend to work in the upcoming year. So since I know you have a hackathon on a bit of education, so you have a lot of competence here. And of course, probably it's education and training and work guidance probably. And then architecture, engineering, construction, ACE, healthcare, manufacturing, automotive, gaming, film and TV, travel, tourism, retail, sports, so on. But that's only based on the companies who took the survey. The other slides are about the glasses. Here you see augmented reality glasses, but I want to come back to VR glasses. And there's a lot of also action happening in this market, but majority of the market belongs to two players, which is HTC Vive and Oculus by Facebook. This autumn was also impressive because both of those companies released a new headset. HTC Vive released Cosmos, Oculus by Facebook released Quest and Rift S. And and another thing I wanted to also say, which is not on the slide, is probably you also know, which is just interesting to follow what the company does and how they do things, is Finnish company Vario, which develops a super high quality what's called headset or vision that you see everything in very super high quality. And they are, of course, targeting enterprises and trainings who need that specifically. And though it's still for consumers too expensive to buy it, and that stops from the whole industry from development, and there's a lack of content. So again, coming back to hackathons and US creators, I mean, really, those hard producers of hard are really lacking content for the new gadgets, and that's the case of Oculus also. They released the Quest, and right now everybody, of course, are working of adopting their content for the new headset, but there is a market for content and a good quality, of course, because when the hype of XR was on the hype. The content was maybe not always that great, and then you have part of the audience who say, "Oh, I tried it a couple of years back; it was bad." But I don't take as an argument such words, because the headsets are developing fast, the content is developing fast, and there's always new solutions. And even if you have business, there is already industry have thought through how to solve that. And of course, all big companies, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon is heavily investing in this industry also, which proves a bit that it's not gonna disappear. And another slide was about the AR headsets. Maybe I'm not gonna focus a lot on them. Just wanted to show you, maybe you know, there was Magic Leap, and what I should do to get better. Okay, here we go. So you see that's HoloLens by no, it's maybe I made a mistake. Okay. Yeah, that's HoloLens, but I wrote Google, so that's by Microsoft. That's where my mistake is, and yeah, and Magic Leap is supported by Google. So sorry about that. And but the thing I wanted to say here that Magic Leap is very called a startup, and HoloLens was released. They released their second headset, improved some stuff in it, and concentrating a lot on industries. So it's not for consumers, and that's where the strategies of the companies divide. How they approach the market, or how they believe in because the Facebook is the one who believes in users, and that's a video I'm not going to show right now. Maybe you have seen it, or you just can Google. It's a small teaser from Oculus, which is around the release date, with not existing at that time. Right now, it's already happening. The people are using it, but the point is that Oculus Quest is without wires, so we can walk freely in a certain territory. You can have scanned before it, easily interact with other. For now, the headsets are not tracking other headsets. That should be also solved within the year, I hope. Yeah, but that's a really big step for the whole consumer market and creators. Also, so you see the game on the tablet. They see on the headsets, and you see the surrounding, which is just gray. So you can Google that clip. You actually can Google everything I'm telling right now. Yeah, that's just slide because you have the hackathon on education, and I just wanted to stress this, like how industries are changing, how we are changing, how we're learning, and that's the future, and there's no way back. And the history also tells us, well, you on the right-hand side, you see the Dale's Con, which was without a percentage, but you see that on the top, it's very little part, and where users get to try things themselves, it's a bigger part. And then the industry itself painted out the percentage. So every time you see the percentage, that's an original where it comes from, but it was without a numbers. But still, there's a sense that the more you try, and if you even get to tell others about things you tried, you remember much better, and you have a greater confidence to do it yourself in other circumstances. Since we are in the festival, I also wanted to put on as argument about players supporting the industry. So all major A-class festivals has either competition program or just a program for VR, XR, AR, as Sundance, for example. Berlin this year was very a lot marketing theme, which I was disappointed a bit because there was a German film by Fatima Kim, Golden Glove, and they had a VR experience, and they were using it only for VR marketing reasons, basically. And yeah, so the whole festival was talking about this. Oh yeah, VR is for marketing, which I don't believe that's only for marketing. So Venice has their own island, as you might know, and there's documentary festivals, and there's even much more festivals and VR specific or only festivals. And there are some distributors, publishers, broadcasters. I'm not going to talk a lot about this because you have another speaker talking about how to create and distribute your content. But with this slide, I just want to say that these platforms or broadcasters, wherever they are, they can either have open calls you can apply for or get on board while you're producing your content, or just maybe become a distributor when you're done with your project. And then some examples of previous film festivals, what the audience was talking the most about. One of the oldest ones was Notes on Blindness. That's experience when about the person who lost his sight, and he started recording things, and the experience itself is very dark, and you just hear his recordings, how he describes how he's in the park, and he hears what he hears, and so on. So how he perceives a world around him. Another interesting is Mika by Magic Leap, and it's AI-generated woman, which is very realistic, reacts to your facial movements, and it's very hard to believe that this is not real. Another very nice experience is Gloomy Eyes, and the Spheres is also from the old ones, but so the Spheres was produced by the same company. You see some festivals they traveled, and then Gloomy Eyes is theirs, I think, the next production. Not sure if second. And big names also produce virtual reality. I Also Love Dogs. It's just behind the scenes by Wes Anderson. Another beautiful production by a French company, Alice in Wonderland, started kicking off in Venice. And Venice is special about that they have really space for VR, and you can do exhibitions. It's not only you bring your computer and headset, but you can really have a setting wherever is required. Another very nice company I want you to check out is Marshmallow Laser Feast, and they are really those artistic guys who are producing very high quality content. And for what's interesting, that's not for mass or online consumption, but they approach galleries firstly, and they travel through galleries firstly, and so they start in the galleries in the festival, film festival. The Lithuanian project, which premiered in Venice 2018, and that's where I'm heading. My point that even the big players are also making VR, where they have a lot of money, they have maybe huge companies behind them to support them, but the industry is that new still, and people who are coming either from gaming or just passionate about the technology can also play a significant role, get on the same, at the same festival, let's say, where other names are. So this production is animation, as you see, very meditative, and based on the paintings and music from one of our history legends, painter Čiurlionis. And this was partially produced in the framework of the project, which is called Cross Motion, where I think all of the Baltic countries took part. And more, it was regional, so I think Denmark was on board, Germany, Hamburg, so it was regional Baltic Sea collaboration project, just funding several sectors: tourism, medicine, and something else I forgot right now. But just giving money for people to try out things and test and see if something works. And if something works, voila, you go to a film festival or get investment. And that's a poster by Steven Spielberg. But with this, I'm going to talk more about the Baltics right now. That's a cover of the Lithuanian VR community of their group. So each of the countries has their Facebook groups with communities around 1,000 people. They're quite actively working. I don't consider Lithuanian community being the most active, or the least actually, right? The least active from all others, which I see what is happening. But another experience is VR Arena, made by the local guy on the Quest in the 400 square meters school arena. Yeah, to run around, and it's a shooter game, very simple, but very fun. So it's again very cool for those guys who were following the industry for a while, starting to understand where it all goes, and then being ready for a new headset, and they launch with the content. Latvia has their own active community. They recently renamed XRLV. And yeah, they do a lot of monthly meetups, and they have done 2 cross-industry conferences. Oh, the locals you of course know. I put Overly logo there because I think it's one of all active companies funding the community also. And Overly is more concentrated on AR solutions for the marketing. And another thing which I see, what's the difference between Baltics, is that Latvians are good in the industries. So Latvian company, Axonicus, approached the US Army and helping them to train their people to be ready while they're abroad fighting somewhere. For good, hopefully. And Estonian community, sorry, very established, I would say. They have even a very nice page. That's the difference from other communities. You can explore later. And there was another research made about education, learning, and training in XR industries in the Baltics and Nordics. And the author, I think he's American, but there was a Latvian person, contributing author from Estonia. So another great event they're having. It's Euro VR, super funny name, and of course you can guess who's the main sponsor behind this is the European Commission. But still it's cool. I mean, from what we're doing in the Baltics, they choose to go this way, and yeah, welcome to check out their event this upcoming week. And before I finish, I just wanted to, for those maybe who are not aware, to check those 2 products by Google. It's Expeditions and Google Culture and Arts. I'm not going to tell more, maybe most of you know, but it's a lovely project, and it's super nice, of course, to see Google investing in kids and youth and their future audiences. And yeah, I'm done. If you have questions, I'm happy to take a few. Okay, so we can talk later. And yeah, there's no questions, or was there? Okay, so I give a floor for our other speaker, Mikkel from Denmark, who is the documentary filmmaker, and is going to tell you more. He's going to tell you more about documentary filmmaking and the future audiences. Yeah, I have a clicker. And you want this one?
Yeah, so basically what I'm going to go through is a bit about my background And then I'm going to talk a bit about the audience experience, the evolution of the audience. Then a bit about VR and 360 narrative, and I'm going to show some examples of what I've done. And then something about the freedom of choice, which is also something to take into consideration when doing VR. And then kind of some of the projects I'm working on now, where you can put stories in different places, for example on a table, more into like AR. And then I'm gonna end up with talking a bit about what is the ultimate documentary. So let's get to it. Yeah, so I'm from Denmark, and my background is in journalism. So I'm very not tech, very low tech, and yeah, my way into to VR was I've been doing documentaries for some years now, and I started in 2016. Bought like a small 180 camera just to figure out what it was, and I started experimenting more and more, and then these 360 cameras came along, and I started doing documentaries, or tried to do documentaries in 360, mainly just for Facebook or YouTube, and then added on these VR goggles, and the last 4 years I've been doing like more and more VR content, but always like filming, and always out of the concept of having real stories and real people, so no animations. Last year I began experimenting more with interactive narratives. So instead of having just a linear story, trying to explore like, can we use the audience more in our stories? And what I'm most into now is AR and 3D filmmaking. I don't know if you know the word volumetric video, but it's like a way of filming in 3D, and you can put it into these different Unity universes and do crazy stuff. So yeah, I tried to create myself as an avatar, and yeah. So the evolution of the audience, if we can start with this guy. This is basically we have some guys from America, but Homer Simpson is kind of the stereotypical American, maybe also European TV viewer who sits on the sofa, drinks a beer, watches the entire day just whatever comes on. You watch it and you kind of, whatever. The next one is we see the younger generations they're engaging more. You have the PlayStation, you have computer games, you also have mobile devices. You can be on more devices at one time, so you start to interact. Sometimes you can interact with the TV program. And then the next step is this. I don't know if you've seen the Simpsons movie, but it's like a dome. So with VR, we're kind of putting people into a dome, like they're inside kind of the TV. They jump in and then they're inside and they can look around and walk around. So this gives a new way of interacting, and obviously a new role of the audience. And with AR, I think there's the next level is we can kind of scale things. So we can take whatever is in the TV, take it out and put it on a table, or we can put it right in front of us as holograms, or like trying to engage what was in the TV and take it out and play around with it, scale it down, scale it up, which is obviously very engaging for the audience. So from the next slide we can see here, I have always the question when I start doing a project, is it like, am I Homer or am I God? Like, what is my role as, or what do I want the audience role to be? Is it an observer, or is it like a very active part of the experience? So this obviously gives some different perspectives on how to create a story. And this leads to some big questions, and I'm going to go back to these questions because these are kind of the questions that keep me up at night. Trying to figure out what is actually a film, where's the barrier, what does documentary mean? I know when I do normal documentaries, I know exactly what it means, but when we get into AR and VR, what does documentary actually mean? Like, can you make a documentary without any real people? Or can it be all animated? Yeah. The role as the director and the role of the audience. So have this in your mind throughout the whole session, because this is what I think is exciting. So hopefully you also think it's fairly exciting. Next slide. So this was a VR documentary I made in Honduras and Mexico. And it was about the migration crisis. Obviously, Beyond the Wall is a reference to what's going on with Donald Trump and building the wall. And we actually pitched in the idea before Donald Trump was elected. He was just a candidate, and we were like, this is too crazy. We have to do something about this nutcase. But then he got elected, and then it was even more relevant. So I have a small clip from the film. And obviously, it's not 360 when I show it, because you can't show 360. So it's just a 2D version of the 360 thing. Yeah, let's watch it.
Quiero que por favor miren este video, porque este país no es país. Este es un rastro completo. Aquí es rastro también. Yo no lo hago porque no me quiera ir. Lo hago porque necesito salir. Necesito huir de acá.
Build that wall, 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 build that wall.
Is it my phone? Yeah, so the idea with this film was to kind of bring the audience down to the center of where the problem arose, because there was a lot of focus on America and obviously building the wall and Donald Trump, but we wanted to give and it's hard to understand what is actually going on in a country like Honduras. So we wanted to take VR as a medium and with the technology, give the experience of actually sitting in front of these people and look them into the eyes that are affected by what's going on in Honduras, which is a lot of violence and horrible stuff. And also give, kind of set them in the shoes of the migrants, to put them into like these areas that are very important for the migration route. And it kind of gives you an idea of what does these migrants experience along the way. And I think there's a lot of good stuff about making 360 documentaries. One of the obstacles is you have the audience being kind of paralyzed, because you sit there, you can look 360 around, but you can't move forward, you can't move backwards. So it's kind of an obstacle. But if we go to the next slide, some of the things that really work is working with empathy. Here's a mom whose two daughters were kidnapped and killed by a gang. And she's looking into the camera, and when you sit there, she's like very intensely looking into your eyes, telling her story. And it's very emotional, I think, the connection you can have wearing VR goggles instead of just a regular 2D TV screen. But also the ability to teleportate people somewhere in the world. So actually breaking kind of laws of physics. And with the next slide, I kind of think it as, the Google Maps where you drop the guy somewhere, if you can think of a good place to drop somebody, and they can just land in there, and you could be there, and you can look around like 360. I always try to think of this, what would be an exciting place to drop people off? Because they can't move around once they're there, so it's very important you pick the right place. But if you pick the right place, it can be super exciting. The next slide. And one of the principles I work with is trying to think like an old school theater, like Shakespeare, where you have the audience down here. You have like the main stage in front of you, like I have a bit now. And then you have something around that brings you atmosphere. You don't want everything to be all around and people looking like this, because if you sit in a chair like that, you can't really turn around. So focusing on something that's kind of in the center of attention, and then having something that gives you atmosphere all around. Here's the crowd and if you didn't have all this around, you would just see modern buildings. So it wouldn't really work. It's kind of creating an illusion of being in another time and place. Yeah. And also try every time I do a story to think on this kind of interactive storyline, where in one end we have like very storyteller focused, and here is very audience driven. So if you write a book, it's word by word, letter by letter, from page 1 to the last page. A film, you have a bit more, you can look at one character or the other, so the audience is kind of more in control, but you still have a very strict narrative. You can't switch from scene to scene on your own. 360 film is a bit more audience driven. You have the opportunity to look around, which means if I do something 2 places in the scene, people can watch both of like actions 2 places. So either they're gonna miss something, or you have to be very sharp on narrating like the storytelling and showing people where to look. But it gives the opportunity for the audience to look away, and you don't have that in regular film. And of course VR games, where you have like total, you can walk around, you can do whatever and go up and down, and that's the ultimate audience-driven narrative, I would say. I'm gonna get back to this again. So again, what is a film? I think 360 is still like a film, but it's also more becoming an experience, since it's more audience-driven. I still think our film counts as a documentary. My role as a director has changed a bit, because I can't do a close-up. I'm losing all my framing, so I'm kind of handicapped. A lot of the tools I use as a regular filmmaker, I lost them. So it's difficult to make. It's about making the right choice on where you drop the man. If you place the camera the right place, you're good to go. If you place it the wrong place, you're fucked, because you can't mess around with it afterwards. And the audience is, of course, a more active part than a regular film. So a project that was just released lately is Brothers Across Borders, which is an interactive point of view experience. It's 2D, and it's not in goggles, but this is a way of creating even more freedom to the audience. The action is in the southern part of Turkey, and it's kind of dilemma-based on what to do as a Syrian refugee. You just arrive in Turkey, where you're gonna go. So let's watch the trailer.
اسم الشخص اللي داير محمد العين. Tanıyorsunuz. Merhaba. Merhaba. Bana oynamıştı. Kardeşim, merhaba, nasılsın? Ne yapıyorsun? Seni çok özledim. Genç yaşta saçları ağarmış gelir.
So this is a different way of freedom for the audience. You don't have the freedom to look around as you want, but you have the freedom to choose. And you still have like the point of view perspective. You're inside the mind of someone. Here we've given you the perspective of a character. In our 360 documentary, you're just yourself, or you're kind of like a ghost, or you don't really know what you are, or you're a camera. Or here we kind of gave it a role. So that's also something like, what is the perspective? Are you a person, or are you just whatever, a ghost? And if we can take the next slide. Here it's, even though it's not a 360 film, I think it's even more audience driven. We're very interactive. I've chosen the beginning, and I've given you some choices, but I haven't chosen the story you're gonna experience. So everybody has a unique experience, and I think obviously it's a hard task to make such a big script, because 90% of what I do you don't experience. But it gives a very cool initiative, and you can engage your audience in a new way. And this is specifically for school, for education. So the school kids are very engaged in it, and instead of just making a film where you sit like Homer, and obviously kids today, they're going to bring out their phone and be like, whatever, Snapchat. So interactive film engages the audience even more. Yeah. You have some choices doing a script. One way to do it is like do like a very branched narrative, where you can end up dying. You can end up like, is there only one way to win, or do you have 10 different endings? And obviously this is very complicated and very not, you can't really do a strict narrative this way. If we take the next slide, what we worked out, the principle we worked out from is this, where you have a narrative, but you have choices within that narrative. So it's not ultimately audience driven. I'm still the narrator. I'm still deciding like this goes forward this way. I have some points where everybody's like, there's some flashbacks, there's some decisions. We wanted to end up with an ultimate dilemma, but the knowledge from which you choose your ultimate dilemma, the choices you make, is from a different perspective. You've gained knowledge from different areas you've visited. Yeah. And this is just one example of how to do like a narrative that branches. And obviously it goes out and in and out and in. Like, this is something that has to be like the final choice, and then you have different ways to go, and you have, does it make sense? Like it branches out and it branches in, branches out, branches in. Yeah, so it's just a matter of making the choice. Also, if you make like a VR experience, how much do you want to be in control as a director? And obviously here the audience is like the co-director, so they kind of make their own film throughout the experience. Yeah, next slide. And again, what is a film? I think this is a film. It's kind of becoming more like a game because you have interactions. It ended up with you having to write a text to your mom explaining why you ended like you did. You would never do that in a film. So you have to do like certain stuff that is very game elements. So I would say this is kind of game-ish. Is it a documentary? Well, obviously, since you become the role of someone, we had to make up a character. But all the characters you meet along the way are real people telling their real stories. And the narrative of you is based upon interviews from real Syrian refugees. So I would say it's still a documentary, even though we're breaking a lot of the documentary rules. The role as a director is giving a lot of opportunities and kind of making it into a narrative, but it's very loosely directed. And the role of the audience is, if you don't do anything, you're not going to watch the movie, so you can't be inactive. In a 360 film, you can be inactive and still get the experience. You can sit and watch just straight ahead, and you're still going to get the point. Here, if you don't do anything, you're not going to have an experience. So, the next slide is a project I'm working on now, which is kind of a combination of the two. Trying to do something that is very immersive. I would say the Brothers Across Borders is not immersive in a way you don't feel like it's just a computer screen. With AR, you become more immersive. You can walk around stuff. And we also want to do it like a branched narrative, so an interactive narrative. And we're kind of, the idea is to do a story on the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, and try to work in 3 levels of 3D. So it's more like you have your table, and we're going to bring the experience to the table. So you have a level where it's a map that you can navigate on through your mobile phone, AR. And then the next level is, the next slide, is trying to, like the map we're going to do like with drones. You can do like photogrammetry with drones, where it kind of takes a lot of pictures, like Google Street View. Here we're going to try to make certain buildings that you can push your way into, and you get like these photogrammetry 3D environments where you can try to navigate, and it's also going to be on the table, so all the time you can get into a new level of interactions. And the last level is using 3D holograms. So using 3D video, we're going to try to make 3D holograms of the actual Rohingya refugees, so you can, I don't know if they should be on the table or be real life size, but you have the opportunity to actually meet some of the refugees in your classroom or wherever you are. And some of the inspiration we've had is Westworld is a fucked up example, but the idea that you have kind of a narrative that is in front of you, and obviously we don't control, because that would be very immoral, but you have a narrative in front of you where you can kind of dive in, and you can choose where you want to go and which scenes you want to dive into. But also Avatar, where you have like something in front of you that you have on your table, and you can look at it. Here's a tree. It could be a 3D hologram of a human being. And I have some videos. Like this is a farm from my friend in Denmark that we went out with like a drone and did like a lot of photos and made like a 3D model of the farm. And I have a few videos as exam, and it's still like beta testing because I don't know that anyone's done like specifically this project before.
Som I kan se her, så har jeg prøvet at lave en lille
If you just turn off the sound on this one.
3D-model optaget i et take med Kinecten og videooptag.
So this is just me in my home, like doing like a scene with like a building, and then me as a 3D hologram vacuum cleaning. And it kind of lives up to my standards. It has to be real people, real video, but in a 3D environment. Obviously, it's not perfect, but you're starting to have like some sort of an interactive 3D documentary style AR. I'm not really sure what it's going to end up with, but I just like the idea that you can combine these technologies. And the next video, here's like the forum, and you can have it in front of you, and you can kind of explore the surroundings. Still, it's kind of meshed up, but the idea is that you can navigate around, and in the real version, you would be able to kind of go inside. And I think in the next scene there we put in a hologram. Yeah, so here we're testing with putting actual characters in. So this is also like actually filmed footage from a Danish rock band. So we just put them into the farm and we put on some layers because it's kind of still messed up. But I'm at a point now where I have all the ideas, I just don't have the skills. So I'm teaming up with some people who have the skills to actually make it look good. But yeah, this is kind of a, can you take the next slide? Yeah, this is like a user-controlled experience, very user-controlled. You can control the weather conditions with some buttons, which obviously is going to affect the everyday life in the refugee camp. The narrative is branched. There's no like beginning and end. You can navigate in 3D rooms like you do in a computer game. You can go and explore different stuff like, oh, what are they drinking? Or what's in the computer screen. And you can interact with these 3D holograms we're making. So we're working on, you can actually have some conversation. So there's maybe 10 questions you can ask, and you have to actually ask them using your voice, trying to make it even more immersive. Yeah, next slide. Here we're getting even more into a computer game. It's not really a VR game because it's still in, you're not in a sphere, like it's on your table, but it's definitely more in a computer game, interactive film. And if we take the next slide, here questions become really interesting, because I can't figure this out. Maybe you can help me. Would that be a film? I don't know. Does anybody have? Not sure? Yeah? How do you define that?
Because your experience is not a story, but some kind of complex of stories maybe.
So if it's a complex of stories, it's not a film.
I don't know.
I don't have the answer. Yeah?
What is the difference between a film and between a game?
That's the question. That's exactly the question. I don't have the answer. I think it's becoming really meshed up now because I see myself as a filmmaker. I'm not a game developer. I would never do that. Sorry?
You are becoming a game developer now.
But what I'm doing is I'm still doing I'm taking my equipment down to Bangladesh. I'm doing video interviews with real life characters, and I'm showing them to the audience. So the method is exactly the same that I would do in a documentary. The way I mix it together is different. I'm just giving you the opportunity to pick and choose which interview, what questions to ask. Yeah. A gamified film experience? Or just, yeah. So how much of a narrative does it take for it to be a film?
Well, I don't know the whole project, so I can't tell you.
Yeah, I haven't done it yet.
I would say just not a simple film which one you could see in the cinema. It's just a kind of different film. You know, there's also the games, computer games, where you can choose, where you can answer with different phrases. For example, you can agree or you can disagree. So your story will disagree. I can speak. So I think it's also the film, but just a different film. Like, yeah.
But would it be a documentary game then? Does that exist? I have no idea. I don't play games.
Maybe it's called Dog Game.
Dog game. Now we're starting to do something really cool. Yeah. And obviously the role as a director is becoming more like a game developer, which is weird. And the role of the audience is obviously also very different from sitting down and watching a film. But I think it's an exciting experience as an audience if we can actually make it. Yeah. So these questions are obviously something that I think should be in the mind of everyone who's experiencing with these mixed realities, virtual reality. Like, what is it actually that we're doing? Is it a game? Is it a film? What is the role of the audience? What is my role as a creator? Yeah. And this leads to what is the ultimate documentary? Because now I was trying kind of navigate it from something where I'm in control, where the audience is getting more and more control. And I think if you could just play the video with like the VR chat thing. And this is like an example of the nightmare.
Dude, what the
This is VR chat.
I want to feel like a cat. Oh wait, you're not real.
So people are avatars in this world.
Real girlfriend. So he comes on VR chat and he can't even get a VR girlfriend. So now he just hates anime.
I mean, that seems like the only logical
Yeah.
explanation.
I mean, it makes sense. I believe it.
We got some
Oh my
Kermit
God.
action. I like this. Male Kermit. I've never seen a female Kermit. It's kind of lit.
Have freaking full body tracking.
Damn, she bad.
Damn, get it.
Yeah, they're definitely e-dating. Fuck her silly. Yo, spice it up a little. Come on. Come on now. Spice it. Shut up, bro.
Damn.
Say it. Finger little Kermit's butt.
Finger his butt.
Sonic is trying to do.
It's what people do in VR when they get total liberty.
Keep it. I'll listen to you.
I will eat your ass, bro. What a fucking cunt you are. Somebody's doing something, you know, that's maybe not in their comfort zone, and you would just come and fuck them up like that? Like, come on, bro.
Bro, I never said it. I never said it.
Yeah, so this is the nightmare of giving audience control of your work. Like, it's just gonna become fucked up. And I tried this VR chat, and I was like hunted down by some Russian guy, and it was just horrifying. And I was like, afterwards, why did I just take off the glasses? But once you're in there, you're just trying to run away, like fuck off, and I could just take them off. Yeah. So that is not where I want to end. I hope that we can find a way where it's not total insane VR chat style. But what I'm curious about and what I hope to figure out, also talking to people who have different ideas and backgrounds, is what would be an ultimate storyline for a documentary? Would it be interactive film combined with VR game? Is it more, should we go back to more film narration, like more control to the director, combined with a VR game? Is it a film computer game, or is it just a film? Is that the ultimate documentary? Because I've thought about that for a while. Maybe it's just not the right way to mix it. Maybe I should just do computer games, as you said. It's just a computer game. Could be. And yeah, so some of the questions I always think about is, are we film directors or facilitators? Like, do we facilitate an experience? You could argue that that's what I've been doing on some of the things I've been doing. I see myself as a film director, but can a story be like an endless circle? Does it have to end at some point, or do people choose their own ending? Is a movie defined by an ending? And here's some really fucked up stuff, like can we have an ever-expanding narrative with an AI as the director? So could you always come up with new interviews and new ideas that you would have, or would it just be a game? Depends on if, yeah. So in the future, maybe directors will be AIs. And when does interactive VR documentary become a chat room? And the audience, of course, do we want them to be co-directors of what we're doing? Or do we want them to sit like Homer Simpson? When does it become a game? Is the narrative crucial for a documentary experience? How much can the audience drive the narrative before it becomes a game? And does the audience even want this role? Do they like these types of experiences where they have a bigger and bigger role? I don't have the answers for this, so if anybody comes up with a good idea in the next couple of days, then that would be awesome. Yeah. I think, yeah. So that's like a question for me, like, is the ultimate documentary a super high-tech VR, ever expanding, not feeling anything and feeling everything on your body and all this, or is it just sitting in a cinema and watching a great movie? I don't know. We'll figure out. Yeah, any questions?
How does localization work, especially in your story about Syrian refugees?
Localization of...
Like translating, would that story work in schools in Latvia?
Yeah, it worked. We have 8 different languages now. So, yeah. It's made in collaboration with the Red Cross. So, yeah. But it's kind of heavy in translation because there's so many branches. But yeah, it could.
I'm a creative director. I work in the XR industry. XR, as we learned from your talks, like the abbreviation, the short form for like all the virtual realities and augmented realities. So if you see XR somewhere, like it means virtual reality, augmented reality. So instead of like making a super long sentence, virtual, augmented, mixed, and meet reality or whatever, we just call it in the industry XR industry. I have a background in UX and industrial design. I was a car designer for Porsche and Mercedes. I worked on some really nice cars and interfaces back in the past. Why? I originate from the Black Forest in Germany, and there's nothing really with car companies down there. It's like Audi, Porsche, Mercedes, and the coolest thing you can do down there is do the car design thing. So that's how it started for me. And now I'm a consultant speaker, and I do a lot of R&D with amazing companies like AMD, Google, Mozilla, Samsung, Sony, and Wacom, just to name a few. I travel all around the world, and my main job is to break things. So these companies create amazing technology, and sometimes they aren't even aware what is possible with their technology. That's where creators like us come into play. Doesn't matter if you're a programmer, artist, illustrator, sculptor, or whatever. Like whatever you do, if you're a human in a creative field, I consider programming very creative. These companies create amazing products that they give to people like me before they release it to the public, and I go in, I break them, I find out what the limits are, and to give you more of an insight of what that means, here's a short video of some of my past works I did last year.
yourself over. You sold yourself for that job.
What just happened? So many different things happened there. You saw illustration, you saw 3D modeling, you saw sculpting, you saw augmented reality, you saw face filters, you saw virtual reality experiences. I saw some 360 content. You saw some stuff that's like a 2D illustration that turned into an AR thing that is controlled by people's faces via a camera. So this reel is like, this is all just done by myself last year alone, and what it encompasses like experimentation. Just finding out, like we heard a lot of questions today, is like, what can this technology do? People like me go out there, take a look at the technology and try to find creative ways on how companies, creatives can use them to express themselves, to market their products, to create documentaries, educate, and literally anything human, everything humans do. Like, is it learning? Is it teaching? Is it research? Is it work related? Or is it just art or design? I listed some programs, some software here. Everything you just saw was created within virtual reality. So that doesn't mean I was sitting in front of my computer with the mouse. I created everything while being inside virtual reality. I brought a Oculus Quest with me. We mentioned it earlier. It's the recent product from Oculus. It's tetherless. There's no cables running. There's no computer attached. You just put it on your head, and you have 6 degrees of freedom with your controller. It's in and out tracking. This means there's no cameras you have to set up or sensors or anything. You just put it on your face, and you just start creating or playing or watching a movie. And what this really symbolizes is a huge evolutionary step in the technology, because last year when I did all the stuff you just saw, I had to sit at home with my computer. You need a super powerful computer. Like a computer costs like $2,000. Then you have the headset, it costs $800. It's a huge investment. That thing over here, that's 400 euros, and you don't need a computer or anything. So the trend is to go as tetherless as possible, minimize the technology, because this is not pretty. This is a huge piece of plastic you put in your face. This is really not the smart way to this doesn't look creative, but the trend goes towards making the technology itself invisible. So you don't even know that you're like in VR or not, but later I have more on that. There's Tilt Brush, the software you saw me painting in. There's Quill, which is more aimed towards Illustrator. There's Oculus Medium on the right. It's like 3D sculpting, 3D modeling. Some of you may have been like a bit intimidated to do like 3D modeling. It's really hard. It's unintuitive because you have to sit in front of a 2D screen. The interface is very cluttered. With tools like Oculus Medium or Tilt Brush, you just sit down and you just create something. You don't need to learn interface or watch tutorials on YouTube. You just go. And that's one of the very big advantages of virtual reality, because you rely on human inputs. Where like, I want clay to be there, and you just go in there with your hand and you push a button. There's no, okay, I have to like poly reduce this guy, then I have to UV map this thing. It's like, no, you just take the thing, press the button, and that's how we humans operate best, because it's a more natural way. Because in the real world, when you're a sculptor, you take the clay and you just put it there. And that's how the way it should be. And that VR enables us to do just that. There's other tools like Blocks, which is like a low poly modeling tool, which will be very interesting in the hackathon later on, where I will be mentoring you guys. If you have any questions on that regarding content creation or anything, I'll be supporting you guys in the next days. There's Gravity Sketch, which is pretty cool for industrial designers, Masterpiece VR, NMVR for animations inside virtual reality, and Tori, which is pretty neat for when you want to animate things and bring stuff in or create stuff from scratch, but more on that in the coming days. Video, please. And what we're seeing here is Tilt Brush. This is the painting application. Some of the works you just saw in the previous video was created in. It's pretty neat because if you want to prototype something or if you just have an idea to sketch it out during the hackathon or just in general to visualize an idea, you just put it on and create it in 3D space in front of you. As you may have already noticed, I focus more on the creation part. Like, how do you create something in VR? You can take a camera and go somewhere and record something, or you can create something that was not possible to record, or is it physically impossible? Painting in midair. It's like, this gravity, it falls down if you put paint in the air. So virtual reality enables you to like create something that wasn't possible before. And that concept alone is pretty powerful because suddenly your brain unwraps and you suddenly come up with pretty surreal ideas or interesting concepts. For that reason, I created something that's called VR Every Day, where I did an experiment in virtual reality every single day for over 450 days last year. And like virtual and augmented reality to find out more about the tools we can use and how we can create all kinds of contents with them. There's a short video in the background to scroll. Exactly, there's it's around 450, 460, I stopped counting. One thing that is very powerful is always as a creator, when people ask you, oh, that's a really nice piece, or that's a very exciting environment. Can I go there? And I can say, yeah, you can go into my art. You can go into my painting, for example, or you can go into this anatomy study that I did. It's something artists couldn't do before, or designers, or people, or engineers. It's like, it wasn't possible to communicate an idea, because we as humans, we are very, very visual beings, and just having a napkin sketch helps communicate something so much better. What you're seeing here is mostly 3D. Like, there's no pictures involved. It's like created completely from scratch within virtual reality. There's nothing, and suddenly there's whatever you want to experiment with. Okay, next slide. We talked a lot about interactive and passive things. I tend to avoid the term games. I tend to use like interactive media. They are pretty interesting to research on. Why is playing a game fun? Why am I engaged by this piece of media? Why do I love watching this movie? Why do I sit on the edge of my seat and I'm excited to see what happens next? Like, games are one of the precursors of like human psychology, where we try to figure out what are our triggers. There's so much going on in in interactive design that we can learn from old games, even if it's just Tetris or recent games. They are the best way to study how to create VR experiences that are engaging, because Super Mario World, for example, they found a way back then to like motivate us. Why was everyone eager to like go to the next level, or why do I have to jump there? Because there's sudden clues hidden in the game that trigger us to react to the environment. And by dissecting interactive media like video games, we can learn so much and implement in virtual reality experiences. And it doesn't need to be a game itself, because if I'm an accountant, it's a boring job mostly. But what would it be if I could make accounting a super exciting task? Like, oh, I really look forward to go home and can't wait to do my taxes. No one ever said that. But what if you could make doing that fun? Like doing your taxes fun is like this. You need just a bit of creativity, and look into old games like Super Mario World, for example, and you could create something with that, like pull out the motivational triggers that make things exciting. So as one experiment I did where I recreated the Super Nintendo title Super Mario World in virtual reality, just as a study, just to see, okay, why was this designed this way? Video, please. Why was this important? We are still pretty early on in the phase of immersive technology like virtual augmented reality. And how do you make it engaging? How do you intrigue people to say, hey, I want to find out more about that technology? I use that. I do that by taking something people know and potentially loved or have some positive association with, like Super Mario World was huge for my childhood, and take it into virtual reality. Alone with this thing alone, is like I managed to inspire so many people all around the world just to start to learn to program, or start to learn 3D modeling or design, just because they saw something that sparked joy in them or more ideas. That's why it may look just fun, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and that inspired a lot of people to pursue their careers later on in the industry. Other stuff I do is like research and development. What you see here was in China a couple months ago. This is underwater VR. Like, gravity is always a problem. Like, when you go underwater, your inner ear shuts off, which gives you the sensation of floating. It's pretty simple. You take this VR headset, like you can see on the picture here, put it on your face, and you can make people float through space or go underneath the ocean. And because the inner ear shuts down when you're underwater, you really believe that you're flying and floating. It's pretty surreal. But you can experience it in Germany. In southern Germany, there's a couple theme parks that utilize this technology. And it's just one of the many fields that we ask questions in. Like that's a pattern we've noticed today. We have a lot of questions that we're asking. What happens if we do that? And it's pretty amazing, and we still have no idea where this is going. But what we know is like this is very exciting and pretty much also one of the most human things, because like we've always like strived to research, break things apart, put them back together, and learn from that to make things better. Otherwise, we wouldn't be all sitting here with electricity and lights. This was in Kazan in Russia, like just a couple of weeks ago. That stadium is filled with 45,000 people. That's 2% of the population of this country is just sitting there and looking at people being creative. That was a pretty amazing experience because there's people dancing here. There's a singer, I was told it's like Russian Lady Gaga or something, somewhere here. Do you see this road here? There was a truck where people grinded down wheat, made flour, and baked the bread on a truck that drove around this thing here. So somewhere here, yeah, that's me here. I'm here and create something in virtual reality that is projected on this huge screen. So people could experience something I create live in virtual reality, and I didn't see any of these people. I was in VR. It didn't make a difference for me if I was like sitting in my pajamas at home or being on a stage in front of 2% of the population from this country here, because there was just me and my art. In that moment, I didn't see a single person. It was just me, my hands, and the thing I created. And that's also a very interesting thing in VR, especially because you can suddenly create way deeper connections, because it's nothing there to distract you. There's no phone, there's no notifications popping up. There's just you and whatever you want to show someone or whatever you want to create. And this was pretty cool experience. The thing that will happen next in a couple of years, you saw earlier the HoloLens, the Magic Leap. This is will probably come pretty soon as well, where we make the technology even more invisible, where it's not these clunky glasses or these huge helmets. And on the way to making the technology invisible. So you don't know if someone's listening to you, or you have glasses on. You could be watching a movie, I don't know, in a couple of years, and you just tap the glasses on the side, and then you're not even here yet, because you blend between virtual and augmented reality or just normal reality. Currently, right now, we're still pretty much like, it's pretty backwards technology. We have these huge screens and tablets, and we hold them, and wow, this is cool. This is still just a gimmick, but we're still on the path to making it more accessible and more engaging. But what's interesting is you can now start creating the content that can be consumed on the newer hardware in 5 years or so. So the content creation is really, really important right now. That's why I will help you in the next couple of days to get the feel for, okay, what can you do, what is exciting, and what can you create. This is some AR studies I've done in Hamburg. There's like, maybe you've seen the movie like My Neighbor Totoro. Like suddenly you can bring creations or avatars or people, things for kids to help them guide them on their way to school so they don't get lost, or help them learn. So you can literally blend the realities together to make kids more aware in school, or help them more relate to a certain topic or scale. It's interesting to read about the moon and dinosaurs, but what if you could send people to the moon with the VR headsets? That's the way we learn. We learn by seeing, we learn by interacting. That's the way we've always learned. So, especially for education, it's very exciting stuff ahead of us, because we can bring concepts from any kind of industry into our world. For art exhibitions, this was in Finland, where we created a couple installations, or this is Hamburg down here, where you can literally install your art anywhere on the world for other people to check out. The AR software I recommend using for the hackathon later on. These are just suggestions, but Spark AR is pretty nice for you if you want to get started into AR. The face filters you've seen, they've been made there. Unity 3D, some of you may be already a bit versed there. Adobe Aero, that'll be coming out soon, and Torch, pretty interesting things, but more on that in the coming days. Video, please. There was AR Core, if you're interested in AR development during the hackathon. It doesn't matter if you created your content in virtual reality and then bring it into AR, or create something in this normal meet reality and then bring it into virtual reality. The best way how to think about these technologies is to not to think about them in separated realities, but just treat them as this reality or any reality you want, because the limitations are pretty much endless. You can come up with your own reality. So I really like the VR chat example we saw in the last talk, where people just started behaving weird in virtual reality. This is one project I've been working on for a while. This is a piano bar. It's creating an environment for people to create their own stories in. The most important part for storytelling that I've learned over the years is give people just the context. Just give people a space to create, and they will fill it with stories. You've seen the VR chat example earlier, where like, oh, there's Kermit and there's stuff happening, but this can be used by NASA to communicate with their families back at home, or for people to replay their old memories or conversations with their loved ones when they passed away. So it is really the environment that you create that dictates what people do with it, or what are people inspired to do with it. Questions? Otherwise, later on, I'm available in the coming days to support you in any way or form. And thank you so much for listening.
No questions. We are so surprised with your presentation. Okay, thank you. So yeah, Vladimir will be tomorrow in the hackathon and on Sunday, so you can grab him if you have free time and talk to him and ask questions later. And then we move on because we have 2 more speakers. And now I'm going to invite Jessica from UK to give a talk. Yeah, she's here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. And a clicker. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, welcome.
It's that way, right?
Pointing to the...
Okay, where am I pointing at? This way, okay. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. First, thanks for having me. My name's Jessica Driscoll. This is an incredibly silly photo of me with an old HoloLens on. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to myself so you kind of know where I'm coming from and what my perspective is. So I've been working in immersive since 2007. I started my immersive career of working in Second Life. Can I have a show of hands? Does anyone remember Second Life? It was kind of like The Sims, but for grown-ups. Yeah, okay, the older people here remember it. So when I looked at the VChat example, I had to laugh a lot because I lived like that for 7 years, hence kind of going into VR and AR afterwards. I've also worked in BBC R&D in a team called Future Experiences Technology, taking the technology that the BBC have created and testing it with large-scale audiences, so anything from VR, AR, and most latterly to kind of IP production that doesn't involve a human. So you can imagine how upset the directors and producers were when I said, oh, we don't actually need any of you, we can mix all of this with AI. That didn't go down very well, which also links into my ethics bit later. I've also created brand experiences for a range of different companies, for example, Honeywell, BAE, Rolls-Royce, and NGO projects as well for people like UNICEF and Greenpeace. So I've worked across the board in interactive CGI stuff through to film, AR as well. The most recent work I've been doing, I've just finished a contract at a company called Cornerstone Virtual Reality. I'm going to show you the Cornerstone project in a little while and talk a bit more about that and the ethics around it. And on Monday, I'm just about to start a new job at a company called Digital Catapult. And I'm sure I'll be interested to talk to you lots about my new role. But enough about me. Can I get a show of hands? Whenever you sign up for a new service, does anybody actually read any of the data policy? Does anyone actually read any of that stuff about where people are going to put your data? Nobody? You do? Okay, you're like the only one. Does everyone just tick the box? Okay, let's ask another question. Have any of you ever used any immersive technology as part of a job interview or any kind of process like that? And if you haven't, would you be happy to do so? If the employer said to you, okay, would you put the headset on and do this little test? Would you do it or would you say no? Yeah, you'd do it? Okay, maybe you won't do it after the rest of my talk, but okay, that's good to know. So why should we even care about ethics? The previous presenters, thank you both for your presentations, raised a few interesting comments. Mikkel used the word moral. Well, he said, used the word immoral when he talked about influencing the narrative within the space. And Vladimir also talked about triggers. You know, what are people's triggers for motivation? Why do they do things? And why should we even care about that? Well, I talked to you a little bit about the job interview example. If you did the job interview, as you know, this kind of test as part of your interview with VR, and you failed or you did badly and you wanted to look at the report afterwards and the employer wouldn't give it to you, who owns that data? You've created the data, but what if they don't give you access to it? What if you are asked to do a test to create a new shopping mall, for instance? So you're in the VR headset, you're biometrically tracked, you're walking around the shopping mall, you can see, oh right, I'm attracted to shoes, oh that bread smells delicious. This is quite a benign example of using VR to create a better experience for people. That data, it isn't really that dangerous or bad. You know, it's just, do you like bread? Do you prefer red or yellow? How high should the shelves be? But if the information from your job interview test was used against you, or you were excluded, for example, for adopting a child by doing a test in VR or AR where your biometric data was captured, is this correct? Should you be able to say, this is how I felt, or should the employer or company be able to look at your data and say, you know, actually, this is how you felt. I can see that your pupils dilated here. I can see that your muscles are tense here. You know, where are we going with all of this? An academic called Bay has talked about something called the anticipatory technology ethics in XR. Vladimir had a really nice animation there of the kind of AR characters being around in the world with you. It would be amazing if we had AR companions like that. I would love it. You know, I would have a little dog. I don't have to clean up its mess. My kids could play with people, so I wouldn't have to play with them. That would save me a lot of time. Those persistent worlds will probably arrive. They've already started with things like Pokemon Go and the Mario Kart example. That kind of kinetic fingerprint that we're building when we enter these experiences all creates data. You know, who owns that data? Where is it going? Who is it going to be used by? Nobody said they ever read any of the conditions when you signed up to any services. So where is that data? What's going to happen to it? Ethics and moral sensitivity. How can we build this into the design of products? Who should be the person who decides? Is it the individual? Is it the creator? Is it someone like Facebook? Is it a government? Should there be regulation against that? And also, there is a tension between companies wanting to push the envelope, create new technology, and really, really get excited about new things, but also how do we protect the freedoms of the individuals and how do we safeguard? I want to talk to you about a few projects that I've come into contact with over the last 12 months to kind of better illustrate my point. And the first one I'd like to talk about is Cornerstone. And this is a project called Being Me. What Cornerstone have done, they were founded by 2 adopters, and the adopters adopted kids when they were really, really small. And when they were about 7 or 8, they started manifesting really, really challenging behaviours, and the parents were really at a loss with how to deal with this. And when they talked to the clinical psychologists and the social workers, they realised that the children had been impacted very negatively when they were very, very small, and some of them already when they were in utero, in the womb. So what the adopters wanted to do is they wanted to create some 360 experiences that helped people to understand what childhood trauma and attachment looked like. So the first example, you're in the womb and you're experiencing domestic violence, you're experiencing your mother smoking, taking drugs, you can hear a lot of sounds from outside. It's actually very disturbing and really scary. The next experience they created, you're in the perspective of a young child, you're very, very low down, and you're in this horrible apartment. You experience the father shouting at you, the mother is taking drugs, the mother is very, very unavailable, and the scene gets worse and worse and worse. Again, the power of 360 in this case, it doesn't need to be interactive. You're trapped, you're a little child, you're scared, you're near the floor. So it's a perfect tool for that, because most people have never, ever been in this situation. And then the second suite of films is in a school and then in the adoptive home. So it's not all kind of doom and gloom. They give you practical parenting techniques on how you can deal with the children afterwards. They've rolled this out in 40 regions in the UK and tested it with thousands of people. So it's already a full-scale, kind of government-backed, sponsored program now, which is, I think, probably the world's first. But very, very early on, they realised that you can't just put the headset on someone and leave them. It was really dangerous because people, to use the word that Vladimir used, were triggered. Some of the adopters and foster carers had adverse experiences in their childhood, so being in this situation was very, very disturbing. So what they did was they created a qualification called the VR practitioner qualification. So you go through a training session with a clinical psychologist or a social worker, and they talk to you about the ethics of using VR, why you should use it, in which situations, how can you use it in a group, how can you use it one-to-one. For example, if you had a teenage child who'd shouted at you and there was like a situation of child-to-parent violence, you would not want to show someone this directly afterwards. It would be highly irresponsible. They showed it also to a lady who then afterwards, 2 days later, saw the face of her abuser when she was a child. It was a memory she'd repressed. Somebody who had experienced PTSD as a soldier, who was a prospective adopter, watched this, totally freaked out as well. So luckily, all of this takes place in a very safe environment with a network and with a kind of system of people to be able to get help. But what's to stop somebody from creating content like this that's very, very triggering and just going out and using it? The next step that Cornerstone would like to take is to use this with the perpetrators of domestic violence and not the victims, so to switch it on its head a little bit. So instead of, a prospective adopter who isn't violent using it, putting the perpetrator in the shoes of the victim. They're going to do this, I think, with Goldsmiths University to make a proper controlled trial, because again, you don't want to just put people in a situation which could be potentially dangerous for them. But I think it will be worthwhile in the end, because even if it helps one person, I think it would have been worth it. I want to move on now to another project. It's called Under Attack, and it's created by a company called Also Known As. They're 2 journalists who have been doing frontline journalism for the last decade in war zones. One of the journalist's husband was nearly killed by a rocket-propelled grenade in Libya, and she said when it happened in front of her, she completely froze. She totally broke down. She couldn't even help her own husband. And in that moment, she thought, I have to do something to help to train journalists or people going into dangerous situations on how they could help themselves and how they could react. So together with another journalist, they teamed up with the CNN training team for frontline journalists, and they've created this prototype. So you enter this dystopian future world, you're a journalist, and little by little you start to realise that democratic freedoms have all broken down, authoritarian regimes are in control, and you are faced with a very angry, nasty man who's shouting at you and wants to attack you. All through the while, your biometric data is captured, which impacts on the narrative. So your breath, your heart rate, your voice, everything's tracked. This is twofold. It's to propel the narrative along, but it's also to make you feel completely surveilled. So every movement that you make and every reaction that you make is being recorded to make you feel like this could be the future and where journalism isn't really free speech anymore. What was quite interesting is the research that they did. The journalists, who have been frontline journalists, didn't find it scary at all. They were like, oh, that's nothing. I've been shot at, whatever. The normal people, the control group, totally freaked out. They didn't like it. I freaked out when I watched it. It was horrible. I reacted with it. I didn't like it at all. I'm like, thanks very much. That was wonderful. But what their research has shown is they need to make it harder. So the point being there is, ethically, for journalists who have signed up for this, who are within that remit, it's fine, and you can push them even harder. You can harness that power of VR, that power, and really, really go there. But with a normal person, you shouldn't. So, have I got any Star Wars fans in the house? Yay, a few. Okay. So if you haven't done the VR Star Wars stuff, it's really, really good. Vader Immortal's just come out. I want to talk about something a bit light because I'm going to go back heavy in a minute. So the Star Wars stuff is really entertaining. It's really, really engaging. It's super fun. It doesn't involve any biometrics at the moment, but imagine if you had your headset on and it was connected to your Fitbit, and when you were using the lightsaber and everything, and you could only use the Force if your heart rate was low. So you had to keep calm, and then you could use the Force. Sounds cool, right? Okay, so fast forward to 6 months later when you're doing a job interview. The company that you apply for was related to Lucasfilm, and they say, oh, Jesse, I see that you really freaked out and you didn't use the Force. So you're not very good at performing under pressure, therefore you're ruled out for the job. This is a fictitious example, but this is something that could potentially happen. I hope it doesn't happen, though, because I want to do this. I want to build it. Maybe Vladimir can help me. I think he's my man. Okay, I want to talk now again about another project that is involved with attachment and trauma. So a PhD researcher called Juliette Brown has created a VR therapy tool which she hopes to launch more widely. But what this is about is she has got a group of people who've all been to boarding school. So this is really common in England. We seem not to like our children very much, and when they're 7 years old, we send them away to be looked after by other people. I don't know if it's very common here, but this group of people were sent away to boarding school from when they were 4 years old to 13 years old. And all of them reported back that they have suffered broken attachments. So there's a psychologist called John Bowlby who says that we form all of our attachments from childhood with our primary caregiver, and if we are taken away from them in a kind of very abrupt manner, i.e. if you're taken away to be in foster care or adoption or sent away to boarding school, this can affect you. My husband went to boarding school. We can talk about that later. But what she did was she wanted to use a psychotherapy tool called Talking to Your Inner Child. So in conventional therapy, when there's no VR, you sit together with your psychotherapist and there's an empty chair, and you have to imagine that in that chair is your inner child from the time that you were removed. I would find that quite difficult because after about 5 minutes I would think, oh, the chair's empty, and you would feel a little bit silly. I don't know anyone who likes role-playing. I hate role-playing. That's why VR is so good. We'll touch upon that a little bit later. But what she discovered was, okay, what if I make a photorealistic avatar of a person and put them in the chair and then facilitate it in a virtual environment? So that's what they did. They found that it was much easier to talk to the child avatar because, you know, you could kind of keep up the role play, the therapist could facilitate it a lot easier. And what she also did was she created like some animation, some film, and she incorporated all of this to really slide the user in. So she didn't just put the headset onto the user and say, oh, meet your 7-year-old self. However, there was quite a lot of learnings from that initial project. So they left the guy in there for 45 minutes. He'd never done any VR before. I think that's quite a long time. And all weekend, he said that he was very disconnected to reality. He said, oh, I didn't really know what was going on. I felt like an astronaut. Oh, you know, it was quite a difficult weekend for me. I decided to stay at home. So she was like, oh, okay. And then I realized, after talking to her a little bit more, that his regular therapist was not in the session with him either. It was a different therapist. So he had to kind of build a relationship with him, meet his 7-year-old self, deal with all of the trauma, all in this very intense 45-minute session, which was not great for him. So the feedback that they had was they should put some safeguarding features in place, an exit interview, some informal chats the next day. So very similar to the way that Cornerstone do things. You know, you have very sensitive testing material. What do you need to do afterwards? You need to give people the opportunity to talk about it. In fact, he needed another therapy session the next day, which I don't know if it worked or not then, you know, but maybe. So we've moved now from being in a 360 environment where you're a static person to the interactive styles of Under Attack and Vader Immortal. Here, where again you're interacting with another person, to this study that Mel Slater and his team did at Barcelona University. So again, another heavy topic. He wanted to see the effect of role reversal, putting the perpetrator in the shoes of a victim in the virtual environment. So as you can see by the pictures here, in picture A, what he did was he put perpetrators in the body of a woman and then put them in a virtual environment to interact with a perpetrator of domestic violence. He did 2 groups, one control group who had not been perpetrators and one group who had been perpetrators. There's a big link between empathy and aggression, and the people that he looked at first couldn't realize, they couldn't see the facial expressions of the female victims. They couldn't see distress, they couldn't see upset. And then when they were in the virtual environment, it helped them. So the environment was interactive. When you looked away, the avatar would shout at you, say, "Look at me." When you tried to talk, the avatar would shout, "Shut up." You know, so it was incredibly intense and a kind of crazy experience for them, I think. However, it was a safe and repeatable place. You couldn't recreate that, you know, in real life. You couldn't get bigger, scarier perpetrators to shout at the other perpetrators, "This is crazy." Totally unethical. You would never do that. But in a VR environment, they could keep it very, very controlled. And the result was, after doing this VR intervention, that they were able to see signs of distress and facial emotions better. So it was a really good study, I think, and it's very interesting. If you're interested, I can send you the link later. So the last thing that I want to talk about is body swaps. So now we've gone all the way along the continuum from being a static person in a VR environment all the way to swapping bodies with somebody else. So I'm not going to talk about this too much. I'm just going to play you the short video, if I can.
Our question is always, what will you do differently? How can you unleash the power of digital? How can we upskill and enable our workers to become relevant for tomorrow and today?
The David project is a virtual human simulation that is designed to help managers train themselves on situational leadership and conflict management. In this simulation, you find yourself in a virtual environment with David, an employee whose HR record is less than perfect.
They're asking me silly questions all the time, constantly interrupting me, so I can't get on with my work. And frankly, I'm too busy doing their jobs for them.
David, thank you so much for coming in to see me today. It's really good to see you. But the first thing I feel is I want to do it again. I wonder if you need to think about when you started work and how it was for you when you started work. That things were looking at myself delivering the message, and I wonder how your boss supported you. You can notice really small things that make a difference. I had some good feedback to act on. I knew how I would do it differently next time, and doing things differently means probably getting things wrong. And in this situation, getting things wrong feels safe. It feels as though you are reflecting on yourself and you are putting in interventions to help you be better next time in a gamified experience.
What I'd like you to understand is that in order for you to progress and be a strong member of the team, you need to change your behaviours and you need to become more aware of the impact that you have. Your mindset is greater than your skill set. Your attitude is far more important than what you learned. So I'd like you to think on those things, please. Okay. And then let's have another conversation in the next 24 hours to decide what the next best steps are. Having that brilliant marriage of technology and the human side of things to get really clear feedback is essential in terms of what enables us to make leaders more aware, to to make better choices and make the changes they ought to do.
So that was somewhere else. They've also done that with nurses in psychiatric hospitals to help them care for their patients better. I did this demo and I was quite disappointed with my performance, so I think I need a little bit more training. I came across as being a little bit harsh, I think, so that's my feedback. I want to talk a little bit about companies that are working at a little bit of a bigger scale. So some of the projects that we talked about, aside from the Cornerstone one, are still small projects or prototypes. Some have been funded by Creative XR, and they've been made for around £20,000, or quite small budgets, and they're waiting for more seed funding to get going. But Immerse, as a training company, has been around for quite a long time, and they use training environments for people like DHL, for Shell. They work a lot in oil and gas. And they generate a lot of data, so about 30 messages a second. So you can imagine how much data is collated. But again, when I talked to them, I said, you know, who owns that data? Who can get access to that? Can the users look at that later? He said, yeah, they can watch the recordings back if their manager lets them. And I'm like, oh, right, so they can't actually access the data by themselves. Again, it's all controlled by the company. And what happens to that afterwards? You know, can it be used by different companies within the same group? And then talking about scale, you probably all heard of Striver. They've shipped out 17,000 headsets to Walmart as a massive countrywide training program in the US. And again, you know, what happens to that data? Who looks after it? What happens to them, the employees? Are the employees allowed to opt out of it? Do they have to do the training? But again, I think we're seeing this whole movement from prototype to scale up to business as usual. And in industries where you don't really consider it to be very tech savvy at all, for example, social work in the UK is a very paper-based industry. The fact that 40 local authorities have taken on VR headsets is quite incredible. And something like training for Walmart, I don't know how technological their training is. But this reminds me of an example of McDonald's. They had to train 90,000 staff in the UK on how to use a new computer system. And they created a game, and everyone went crazy for the game. They were all playing it in their spare time, and people started doing their own scoreboards. So talking about making taxes fun, if you want to work at McDonald's, maybe it is really fun. But again, you know, what are we going to do with that afterwards? So what do we need to consider? We talked a little bit about those different projects, and also we've heard a little bit about the projects earlier. For example, the project about the Rohingya that Mikkel talked about, and you know, what are the responsibilities of the creator? GDPR. In Europe, we're all really good. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back. I might not be in Europe with you shortly, which is a real shame. Please invite me back again. But in the US, they don't have as stringent laws as those. So in Illinois and Texas, they do. There have been several biometric lawsuits. But if you're using an American product in Europe, how do we square that circle? Can I opt out? Can I keep my own data? Can I use GDPR? Can I make people do that? If we had to develop everything within the remit of GDPR, we probably wouldn't develop anything. None of these prototypes would have been developed. So how do we create things that are risky, that do push the envelope, but you know, remain and keep people safe? Also, our mental and physical health and safety. Do we want to be triggered? Do we want to remember things from our childhood? Do we want to be scared shitless from VR horror? Like, I don't know, maybe. I think that the more people experience and the more content gets created, then more of those questions will start to arise. Also, unconscious bias. Every algorithm, every program, every piece of content has been created by someone who has a bias. When we're having things biometrically tracked, for instance, if you're blinking or your pupils are dilating, maybe I can sense that you have a racial bias. And that's maybe your concern, but should it be your concern only if I'm employing you to be a principal of a school? Like, do I need to know those things? Should that factor into what I'm talking about? So my questions are for everyone is classification, support and regulation. Do we need to classify VR, AR, XR experiences like we classify movies? I know some of the VR games are over 18 because they have content such as, you know, you wouldn't want your small children to see. How can we support creators? Programs like the Creative XR in the UK, Immerse UK, and your burgeoning VR industry here. How can we support creators and help them through these ethical dilemmas? And also, how do we regulate globally? Because, you know, what we do in the UK, what we do in the US, it could be totally different. And also, how do we make sure everybody has a seat at that table? When you're thinking about voice interactions with VR, you know, Personally, I hate controllers. I would like to be able to talk properly in VR, just use my hands. You know, that's fine if I can speak English. What if I speak Amharic? What if I speak a language from the global south that isn't really represented? At the moment, you know, if you speak English, if you speak Mandarin, if you speak Spanish, hey, Google's great. But, you know, if you speak a very, very small language, why should you be forced to speak English just to interact with your VR or take advantage of AI and the huge data sets? So this is, just to finish off, this is a picture that I took in a cornerstone training session. So this is somebody watching the horrible scene in the flat where you're getting shouted at by the mum and the dad, and you're the little child, and you can see there that they're reaching out to touch each other. And I think that although my talk has been somewhat dark and gloomy, I don't think that it is dark and gloomy. And I think that everyone in this room, every creator, everybody who has any contact with technology has a responsibility and also a stake in deciding what happens next. It isn't just Facebook and Google and whoever, it is us, and we can make changes and make sure that we have great, amazing experiences, but also safe ones that protect our data. Thanks for having me.
Wow, what loads of information. Do we have questions?
I think I've just made everyone go to sleep.
No, go to think of reading those studies and submissions. So I have a question then.
Sure.
So how we start, where we start? Of course, here's the creators who should think responsibly, and thanks for your presentation, but are we as users also can do something about it, or should we approach organizations? So where do we start?
That's a really good question, and I think that, you know, as a user, you do have the responsibility. You know, maybe you don't want to sign up and you don't want to click your data away. You know, would you ever consider writing to the company and saying, I really want to use your product, but I don't want to, you know, creating a dialogue? And I think that it's important that users use Twitter, social media, write to people, talk to people, because if we don't and we just sit still, everything will just happen around us. And I think at the moment there aren't a lot of forums that are serious, I suppose, to take users' concerns seriously, because Twitter is full of a load of rubbish as well. So if Oculus or whoever are not really monitoring that, they don't really seem to be that bothered about businesses per se. You know, they like the whole consumer thing and the gamer side, but I don't know how much they've really thought about technology ethics. But yeah, I do think it's users' responsibility.
All right. And you mentioned about your new position. Do you want us to tell more, or it's not allowed?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be the new head of immersive technology for a company called Digital Catapult. Digital Catapult is partly government funded, partly private funded, and their remit is to enable UK companies to create technology experiences. So they match small startups with big companies. They run programs like the Creative XR program, where 20 creative projects are given £20,000 each to build a prototype. Then they do a mentorship program. They have masterclasses, they have pitching sessions, and then 3 of those are chosen to be fully funded to go on. So the cohort from last year did very, very well. A lot of the content was at places like Tribeca, Venice, and it really gives creatives a chance to get a foothold in the industry, because if you're an independent creator, it's really difficult to get funding. It's great if you work for an agency, you can create a brand piece and they've got £200,000 that you can spend. But if you're an independent creator, I did a 360 VR documentary about punk indie wrestling, which I have with me if anyone wants to see it. So we self-funded it, and it was really hard. It was like a lot of goodwill, a lot of, asking people, because no one really cared about that agenda. Like, who cares about punk indie wrestling in Camden? But I do. So again, so it'll be an interesting role, I think.
And Digital Catapult is only for UK companies, right?
Well, yes, but I think that because some of our European funding might be removed, I think we'll have to stretch our wings and maybe look to outside. So don't hold us to that.
But worth visiting the webpage and have a look what they're doing, and you'll be.
Please
so, any more questions from the audience? All right. Okay. Thank you. Lovely. And. And then I'm inviting our last speaker, Sonja Bozic from States. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sonja Bozic. Last name is pronounced in Serbian Bozic, but people pronounce Bozic as well. It means Christmas, so I'm Sonja Christmas, and you're free to call me that way as well. Yeah, I come at the end as someone who is going to guide you and teach you how to approach your project, especially now because you're going to be having a hackathon during the weekend. Okay, so about me. The reason why I said Dr. Sonja is not that I want you to call me that way. I want to explain, yes, I do have a PhD, but usually people ask me what kind of doctor you are. You know, they expect more medical, and then when I explain that I study film, it's like, what is there to study for that long, you know? It's like, what are you talking about? So I'm a doctor of storytelling. I cure your stories as much as I can. I have a degree in film editing from Serbia, and there I studied 4 years film editing and how do you structure your story, and moved to the US where I continue analyzing stories and studying stories. But because all this new emerging media became very interesting for me as well, I kind of looked at it as a different type of editing, just different type of medium and different type of connecting pieces together. So it was something I wanted to explore, and that's why I studied. I did my dissertation on transmedia. I think most of you are probably familiar with that term. It means cross-platform storytelling, but in meaning that you build the story world, the story universe in which you combine like a cross-platform storytelling, where you combine different platforms. The best, most commercial example. Close to the the best and most commercial example is Star Wars.
Don't do that.
What happened? Okay, we won't talk about Star Wars. It's okay. Yeah, so as I said, the most commercial example is Star Wars, but then, and you're probably familiar with other franchises as well, but my focus was more on independent type of production. I live in New York, and I'm focused more on independent type of production, not really commercial and Hollywood style. So, what I want to talk about today is to help you how to strategize and think when you start working on your projects, especially starting from tomorrow morning, you'll have to really develop your project. So what is very important to define your project? There are several elements, but something that feels very kind of natural and, we overlook that, it's our audience, so who is your audience? What is your story? What's the purpose of that story? And who is your audience? We think sometimes in more broad terms, well, general audience, I just want to send to my projects to festivals, but even then, you have to define it very precisely because that will help you strategize and structure your story. It will help the elements that you want to include in what works for you and what doesn't work. So, there is a rule called 80-20 business rule, but it applies also in storytelling and in audience engagement. What it means in a business rule, it means that 20% of the, for example, in a company, you have employers, and 20% of your top employers are in charge of 80% of the revenue. For films and for impressive stuff in the audience, that 20% of the audience is responsible for the 80% of your engagement. So the audience is divided in several groups, and we don't think about them in groups. We always think just general audience, or we think about, everyone who is going to access our content will just be super engaged and crazy about it. And that's not the case, because still 80% of the audience is very passive audience. There are two different types of experiencing the content. Mikkel had Homer Simpson and Bart. Homer was kind of sitting on a sofa, which is called a lean back experience, and lean forward is when you're really actively engaged. So what is happening is that we have 80% of passive audience. 80% of people still want to lean back and passively consume the content. Even though you're creating, we're talking about emerging technologies, we're talking about designing virtual worlds or augmented realities, any type of reality, whatever you want, but people still like to just consume. So how do we go about that? So we create most of the content for this 20%, for 15% of the engaged and 5% of super fans who are going to be very involved in investment. They're invested in your stories. They will spread the word about your content. They will share. They will go of the events. They're the ones who will help this 80% of passive audience come and experience your project. So focus on the people who think about them, think who they are, what they like, where they live, what type of technology they have, how they can access your content. You know, we don't think about when we are creating virtual reality, you know, whether our audience is able to actually see it. You know, what happens most of the time, we have smartphones nowadays. We download the app and you can still download, there's New York Times VR, Wall Street Journals, Guardian VR, or any within, that's a really good app where you can find a lot of VR content. But what people do, they just move around with their phone. So they're not fully immersed, they're seeing the content, and that's great because it gives them option to see, you know, but what they do is like walking around in circles with the phone in hands and the screen like still being like there in front. So it's more kind of, again, passive consuming than just being fully, completely immersed. So think about that when you're designing your projects, think about that particular group that you want to touch first. Who is your initial audience? Who are they? How are they going to access the content? How old are they? What do they like? You know, is that a particular group of gamers and they're into games, or they're, you know, they're like scavengers hunt and, you know, or they're theater people? Think about that. Think who is your audience and how you're going to talk to them. Other things to think about, so when we define the audience and who is that story for, you know, what do we want to achieve with that story? Decide what platform. Technology comes at the very end. Usually people start thinking, oh, you know, I have this cool idea and VR nowadays is really cool, I'll just do VR or AR, you know. Don't do something just because it's cool. People feel that. You know, something that's kind of not there and artificial, just because it's cool, people will, your audience will feel that and understand. It has to come from, you know, heart. It has to be organic. So think about platforms that are good for your particular story, based on the audience you want to target and based on, you know, the story and the content itself. The source of this is instavr.co. You can find, I purposely put it there because you can learn more about each particular headset. To give you sense, you know, what is the difference, whether you're doing the room scale or not. If you're working on a interactive web-based portions, you know, sometimes people just want to create web VRs. It doesn't have to be in a headset. Again, it will depend on your project and the purpose of that project. Is it educational, artistic, you know, who is it for? So, and then we come to pitching, because on Sunday, am I right? Sunday is the pitching day. Something that's exciting and scary at the same time. We were scared to present and talk, but excited to also to present our projects and so on. So, okay, several things. The first thing that I want to share is, I purposely put this screenshot here. You can find the information. So East Dock Platform is a program in the festival in Prague. It happens in March each year, so the dates are March 7 to 12 to 2020. And you even have Zdenek's contact here. He's in charge of the program. They select 5 interactive projects, so any type of interactive immersive project, AR, VR, any XR project, or interactive web-based, anything that's immersive, and you're like in the development phase and looking for potential client, partners, distributors, people who can work with you. So it's a perfect place to go. The program, it's kind of, I think, 5 days long. So first you have a workshop. So what they do, they bring professionals from the industry and they put you for 3 days workshopping your project, you know, like day and night. You know, I've been twice through that program and with 2 different projects. And it's like really, you don't sleep, you keep working, but it helps a lot. It helps you define your project, again, back to my previous slides. Who is it for? Who is your audience? What's your story? Why do you want to tell it through that particular medium? And so on. So you have like 3 days of crazy workshopping time. Then they have the industry market, so Eastdoc market. Usually we aim to bigger festivals like ITFA, Sundance, Tribeca, Cannes, and so on. So people at Eastdoc platform are doing a really great job. They're bringing the people from these major festivals. But what is easier there, they're not untouchable. You know, you can meet them easily one-on-one and talk and discuss about your project. And this is, I forgot to mention at the beginning, Eastdoc platform is for Eastern Europe, so all of you are eligible to apply. And I think it's a perfect spot where you can meet people and connect with them and help you, you know, make that initial connections from decision makers, distributors, sales agents, and so on and so on. And they have also a pitch. So at the end you present and pitch. So I'll share my experience from the last year, well, this year, sorry. It was in March this year. I was part of Eastdoc Interactive, and they have the traditional documentary type of program and then interactive. So people who came and who were in our audience listening to our pitch were mainly people who are still working in traditional formats. And when we came to, like, our part came to, like, on the at the very end of the pitching, half of the room left because they don't know what we do, they don't understand the medium. And some people who are working in interactive section, they also have a documentary component. So there's those people who left, if they had stayed, they would be able to hear, you know, their elements of the story that they might be interested in. You know, so don't get discouraged, you know, that's another thing. But definitely recommend sending your project there, applying and going there. It's really perfect spot where you're gonna have 5 days of constantly talking, interacting with people who can help you with your project. So, how do you pitch the project? First of all, as I said, find a market, festival, workshop, hackathon like this that fits your project best. Do your research. Don't be, again, stubborn and stuck with the idea, I have to reach the A-class festivals. You know, some smaller places, like Eastdoc platform is the biggest for Eastern Europe, but overall global, it's smaller place, but it's the place where a lot of very important people from other festivals come together, and it's much easier to meet them, you know. At ITFA, it's more challenging, they're kind of untouchable people, but then here, they're like right there, you can talk one-on-one. So find the best place where you can present. Then strategize. Strategize, again, based on your idea, like what is who is the project for and who is your audience. Strategize how you're going to present and approach those people when you go to those particular places. So now you have us here. We all come from different countries with different backgrounds, different knowledge, different experiences. So who is, you know, a best person for you to get helped? You know, you have, for example, is it 5 of us, 6? 5 of us, you know, from different regions who can help you in, you know, as much as we can. Of course, it's very limited time, but that's the type of approach you will have in any of the places. Again, focus on the story, not only on the experience. No, focus on the experience as well. Sorry, focus on the story, but focus on the experience. Everything that you're designing and creating gets into account. So. The biggest challenge for people working in XR industry is to explain you know, what is that project and how it works. For the pitching forums, usually we pitch the story, you know, so documentary filmmakers or fiction filmmakers, they pitch the story. They have 7-10 minutes, depends again from the place where you pitch and present. I had pitched, it was supposed to be only 3 minutes long, so in only 3 minutes I had to explain completely my VR project, which is very, very challenging. So people who are working more in traditional medium, they have time to talk about their story. You know, it's all about the story. But we have to talk about story, experience, technology, everything in that short time, you know. So try to present the clearest possible way. Don't assume anything. Don't assume that people who are going to be your judges understand the technology, understand what you want to do. Try to be precise as possible. Everything is important. Every information is very important because you have very limited time that you need to catch their attention. If you can prototype your projects or do some visual elements, it's very helpful when you're presenting and talking and pitching your story. The more you can show, it will be helpful. And be open to any criticism. They're gonna ask something that, you know, they might not understand fully, or they will suggest how to change it and do it differently. Be open to any suggestion. And then distribution. So this feels like something that comes at the very end. In traditional way, we usually think about, you know, making a film, sending to festivals, finding a distributor. But here, we think about that before, you know, while we define our projects, before we even present, you know, before you go and pitch, you have to think about distribution models. So whether you wanna show it first at the festivals and then have that festival run and then maybe deliver it somewhere else, you know, through the apps. Or you're using this for medical, educational purposes, so your distribution is gonna be for those in those places where, you know, where it's needed. For example, I forgot about that project when I created the presentation. So there is a project called Van Beethoven, and that was designed and done by LA Philly, so LA Philharmonia. They wanted to bring classical music and, you know, the program of the Philharmonic more to the general public. What they did, they created Van Beethoven, which was a van decorated design, is like LA Philly signs. They traveled around LA and just, you know, parked somewhere on the street and gave headsets to people, random people on the street, so they can experience, you know, how is that being, you know, in a concert in LA Philly, listening to Beethoven's symphony. Another example is that people, there was one school, I forgot which school, but they wanted to have like a field trip to Mars. So they put the kids in a school bus and put the screens around, you know, on the windows, and kids were traveling to the Mars and had that immersive creative experience and so on. So not only, you know, you can go and be very creative, you know, there are 2 examples of buses being used for this as a kind of distribution model, you know, that's the place where they distributed their content and that's how they approach their audience. So that's why I said think of a venue, you know, that's from bus to street to any places you have to think. But include that in your talk, in your pitch. You know, it shows that you are thinking seriously and deeply about your project. It's not, oh, this is cool, I'm going to do it. You really analyzed and you understood your audience, you understood your story, you understood the technology you want to use, and then you know what you're talking about, because you have to be very serious and come across as a serious person doing the project for real. You know, the reason why I'm saying this, I don't know what's the situation in Europe, but in the US we had a lot of people who were just jumping on this because it's hot and popular. But the projects were very flat. They did not have, you know, the good feedback from the audience because it just wasn't, you know, wasn't working. It wasn't fitting the medium. They did not think, you know, but they had some skills and funding and they were able to do it. So this is something that comes into account at the very, very beginning while you're working. So think about this tomorrow. And then funding, so money. VR and any XR costs a lot. This is the screenshot, but if you Google, you're going to be able to find, this is a PDF document. I'm going to give to people here, people who are in the hackathon will be able to get that file, but those of you who are not part of the hackathon, just Google New Media Funding Grant. This is from Venice Film Festival from 2017. It doesn't matter, it's from 2017, it's a list of countries and funding opportunities in each country. You know, so there are different business models in Europe and US. In Europe, you guys have government funds who are funding films, VR, new media projects, and so on. In the US, we don't have the government money. We have institutions and foundations who are funding this. So it's very different how we approach there and how this type of projects are approached here. But that's, again, something that you have to think about before, you know, while you're defining your project and while you're presenting and pitching. So Google this and you'll have all the information there and be helpful and able to find, The Art of Not Killing Yourself. I forgot why I put that title, because during that process, you can go completely crazy, thinking that, you know, you won't make it, you're struggling, you're applying to several different funding opportunities, you don't get money, and so on and so on. Don't kill yourself. You do have to spend money to get money, so the program in Prague costs some money, but it's worth applying, paying for it, and being there because you get connected to the professionals in the industry who can help you go further with your project. And definitely don't get discouraged. There is going to be many ups and downs while you're working and creative, and that's normal. That's completely normal. So just, you know, try to survive and deal with that emotion in that moment, and know that the next day you should go back to your project and keep working. And now I want to show the example of my project in the video presentation. So this is the project I'm working on currently. It's called Chocolate Milk. It's an immersive experience of how is that being a person with autism. So my collaborator is Jonathan. We are co-creating the project together. He's a person with autism who is 32 years old. He's kind of on a milder spectrum, milder side of the spectrum. So he's very able to kind of give me many informations, how is that being him. So I wanted to understand, and I'm using the VR technology to understand his views, his experiences of the world. So people like us here who are not on the spectrum can better understand and deal in certain situations when we come across those type of people. So can you play the video, and then I'll talk more about.
So it's the day one.
Hey.
Hey. Day one of our mission.
I learned like the whole purposes of creating documentaries, like how like real world stories, are given to audience, but then they want the audience to kind of experience it themselves. Well, I have many talents, but I also have many struggles because I have autism. So I want to show the world from my perspective. I want people to think of me as just like one of them, only with the challenge that gives me limitations.
So what did we decide to put in a hallway?
We decided to add some slime, some scary creatures, even fire and spikes, because made me think of Super Mario Brothers. So
and you love Super
and
Mario.
I love Super Mario Brothers, and those are a lot of the obstacles he faces in his quests. Well, it's just the neon exit sign that was in the opposite direction where I had to go.
How did you make you feel? What bothered you about that sign?
Just, I guess, going to the extreme, like a creepy face looking at me.
So the exit was a creepy face.
That was right behind me. So, just gave me another thought.
Okay.
We can make like something chasing you.
So the exit sun can be a creepy
Yeah, like a
thing.
creepy. Yeah.
That's like above you and chasing you, and you have to go to
Yeah,
here,
you have to
and
go
you're
there.
telling yourself not to look at the sign because it's
Yeah.
scary. But in order not to look at the walk, you have to go through all these obstacles.
Yeah.
Great. I love it.
Okay, so I'll.
Don't look at the sign. Keep walking. Head down. Keep walking. We're almost there. Don't look at the exit sign.
We're here, John. The doctor's office is down the hall. It's okay, John. It's just a hallway. There's nothing to be scared about. Just breathe. Breathe slowly. Come on. Take a deep breath.
Okay, so the reason why I play this video is that this is something I'm using when I'm pitching and presenting my project, because this is in development. I cannot explain everything, but then I'm using some elements to, first of all, introduce the character, the main person, to people who are going to be decision makers. So what happened when we started working together, I was so impressed and blown away, by Jonathan and his ability to actually explain in visual terms how he feels. He doesn't hallucinate and sees, slime and spikes when he walks in through the hallway, but that's something he used as a reference. So we, people who are not on the spectrum, can understand and be in his feel the same way as he feels in those situations. So I took my iPhone, I literally just put on the table and recorded, whatever we were talking. So I wanted to grab that moment as well. That's why the quality in the beginning is not so great, but I didn't care about the quality. I cared about presenting him and giving that kind of human touch, Not everything has to be perfect and polished, but as much as you can explain and give to your potential audience, especially to judges, during the pitching time, it's helpful. So what we decided to do, we decided to use breathing as an interactive element. So you as a user will have to take a deep breath in order to calm down and move forward in the story. You won't be able to go through this hallway unless you take a deep breath and everything goes back to normal. So what you've seen at the very end, it's just a test scene created during the IFF lab. Part was here done in Riga, so for me this place is very important because we developed part of the story here. And then the technical side was developed in Belgium. So that it was very quick, like you guys have, this weekend, we also had like a day and a half, created something that was presentable. We wanted to test whether our idea will work or not, And so when I'm applying for grants, when I'm pitching the project, I'm explaining this is just a temporary design. This is not the actual design of my project, but it shows that my test, my idea will work. That is what I want to do. It's very limiting at the moment, but when I develop it further, it will be very more advanced. So I was able to show my collaborator. You could see that he's co-creating, that he's the one giving the information. So there's like a true friendship and relationship between us, and that what he's putting on a paper, you know, doing the drawings of the hallway that, you know, he has struggled to go through, because it was very claustrophobic for him. That's why it's designed that way, kind of very narrow and claustrophobic and dark, you know, and that everything he told me, gave as an input, was translated into the technology. Can you just open the file I gave? So some people talk today about 3 degrees and 6 degrees of freedom. What it means for 3 degrees, as you can see, it's kind of you, the world that you're creating is kind of glued to your head and it moves around with you. In 6 degrees of freedom, you are freely moving within the space. For example, in my video, in my test scene, I was kind of connected with the cable, so I physically couldn't move and we were capturing the video, so I felt like I was just standing there. But what I will do, it's going to be 6 degrees of freedom. So you have to understand and be able to understand the difference and be able to define what you're doing. The more information you can give, it will be better. So I definitely advise, you know, and like I use this visual because I think it clearly shows, you know, how the whole virtual world moves around together with you, and how when you have 6 degrees of separation, you can actually move in the space, pick up something if you have hands control, or you kind of walk, you know. So in the hallway scene, you will be able to walk. It's going to crumble in a different way, not the way it's presented. But as I said, I focused on testing the user breathing interactivity. Can we go back here? So this was me. Thank you so much. I think I kind of rushed so you guys don't feel like sleepy. But if you have any questions, you know, we can discuss even after the session. But then now.
Hello. Okay. When you were attending the Eastdoc Festival,
yes.
What was the split between kind of individual content creators, so super startup, as opposed to kind of smaller agencies or bigger agencies? Because when I was at the Creative XR market the other day, I noticed that individual creators are kind of competing with companies like Atlas 5, which to me seems slightly unfair.
Yeah. Because I know who Atlas 5 is, you know, they produce Notes on Blindness that she mentioned. Notes on Blindness, by the way, nowadays is considered like a classic, you know. So back in the days in analog world, it would take decades for something to be a classic. Now it's like a few years. At the Eastdoc, when I was there, and as I said, I was twice there, it was all like small individual projects, you know, so no big companies, no big corporations. It was very kind of centered towards the creators, you know, so usually it's a team of people, a creator, director, a producer, or some technical person who comes, you know, so it's very kind of focused on the artist and it's him or herself. So that's why I think it's a very good program, because they really help you, you know, strategize with your project and then market it, you know, in different ways. And plus, you know, you can get to say that you presented there. It's a kind of stamp of approval for, you know, moving forward, looking for grants and money.
Question regarding the same Prague event, because it's happening a lot around the documentary. It's a festival, documentary market, and as most of the such events, they start doing something XR, and then from what you showed, it looks like it's a full CG animation. The final experience you want to build, and
yes.
Then do you understand then how much documentary it still have to be? Where is the line?
I have to say they have a documentary component, like it's going to be a VR and a documentary. So I think that was the main reason why I kind of fit really well. But then at the same time, they're focused on, like, they're kind of taking into broader consideration projects that are kind of part of interactive. You know, they have separate documentary slots, then a different programs called Exoriente, that's like a year-long program, and then interactive. So for the interactive, there was some other projects who were like blurred with fiction and documentary approach. So they're more open in this section because they just want to, what I feel, they want to give more opportunity to people to come. So it's not limited only to the documentary.
More questions?
Okay, thank you and good luck.
Yeah.